Welcome to Leading for Equity Using Improvement Science. This video will be part of a series of videos to supplement our in-person time together. Today's mini lecture introduces the theory of improvement and a specific tool called a driver diagram. Here are the objectives for our short time together. My hope is that you'll gain an understanding of what we mean by a theory of improvement and continuous improvement and improvement science. And you'll learn one particular tool called a driver diagram for developing and articulating your theory of improvement. And lastly, that you'll learn why using a driver diagram is valuable for leading improvement. There will be one reflection moment in this lecture where I will ask you to pause and reflect upon a question. And the purpose is for you to make sense of these ideas in your own context. And I encourage you to hit the pause button on the video and write down your reflection. We'll kick off, like we always do, with a reminder of our three broad phases of improvement science. First, we need to identify and understand our problem before we jump to solutions. Next, after we gain an understanding of the problem, then we can develop a theory and strategies for how to improve the problem. Then we want to engage in plan, do, study, act cycles of inquiry to rapidly test our strategies and generate new knowledge and learnings that can help us continue to understand and improve upon our problem. And of course, as we consider how to improve inequities in our education system, we need to incorporate systems thinking. Today, we are focusing on developing a theory for how to improve the problem. Some of you may be familiar with this idea of a theory of action or a theory of change. In improvement science, we have a similar concept known as a theory of improvement. So now that you've conducted systems analysis and root cause analysis to better understand your problem, you can begin to develop solutions for improving it. And I use the word solutions in quotes because what is really important to recognize here is that our plan for improvement is really just our best theory or hypothesis at this point for how to improve the problem. It's not a set solution at this point. So rather than thinking in terms of solutions, consider this idea of testing strategies and learning along the way. And your theory of improvement will be a dynamic document, meaning that it can and should be changed, revisited, and revised along the way as you generate new learnings. So this quote from Tony Brike and his colleagues reminds us to stay in that learner mindset, that our initial theories are possibly wrong and definitely incorrect. So what do we mean by a theory of improvement? It's basically a roadmap that specifies where we're going and how we're going to get there. And the specific tool that we use in improvement science is called a driver diagram, which has an aim or goal and drivers of change. So like this map here, the aim serves as our blue pin for where we want to go, and the drivers serve as our roads or our paths for how we'll get there. And if we don't take the time to develop our roadmap and we don't know where we're going, we're very likely going to end up someplace else, as Yogi Berra reminds us in this quote. And possibly even worse, we could end up spinning our wheels or getting stuck in the process, because every improvement is a change, but not every change is an improvement. So take a moment and take that in. Every improvement is a change, but not every change is an improvement. How many of you have been involved in an initiative where everyone was busy making a lot of changes, trying a lot of things, and were putting in a lot of work? Were those changes aligned with your theory for how to improve? Did you have a theory for how to improve? Did you have that roadmap, or were you just making a lot of changes, hoping that something would improve? So we really need to hook our changes into our map so that we know we're spending our time productively, and we're trying changes that we know will lead to an improvement of the problem, or at least that we have a theory for thinking that those changes will lead to an improvement of the problem. And again, that driver diagram is our tool, and the aim is our goal related to that specific problem of practice that we're trying to improve. Those primary drivers are those high leverage drivers of change in our system that we need to push upon in order to achieve the aim. Then the secondary drivers unpack the primary drivers into more actionable steps. So what do we need to do to improve upon the primary drivers? And lastly, change ideas are the specific practices, the new practices that you're going to try that you'll want to test for trying to move the needle on the secondary drivers, which will then move the needle on the primary drivers, which will then move the needle on the aim. So let me give you an example to break down these ideas even more. And again, let's come back to this idea of a map. This is our theory for how we're going to get from point A to point B. So that destination, that point B is the aim. And the drivers show the pathways for how we'll get there. So if we do this, it will cause that. So simple example, let's say someone wants to lose weight. Their aim is to lose 5 pounds by August 1st. So how do they do that? Well, let's break that down into what we call the primary drivers. These are the big levers that we need to push upon to lose weight. So in this case, there are really only 2 big levers or drivers that we want to push on. The way to lose weight is that you take in fewer calories or you expend more calories. Calories in, calories out. Okay, but we need to break that down even further. These are pretty broad and may not provide us with enough detail that we need in order to be actionable. So let's unpack this more. Broadly, what do we need to do to take in fewer calories? Well, maybe I'm somebody who drinks a lot of soda. So I know one area for me to improve is to drink fewer high-calorie drinks. And this is actually the place where it really helps to have a good understanding of your own practices or your own system and where are those opportunities to improve. I could also break it down to consume less sugar. That's one high leverage way to reduce calorie intake. So how am I going to do this? How am I going to push on those secondary drivers? What are the specific things that I could do? These are the change ideas. And in this example, let's stay with taking in fewer calories as our primary driver. And I want to consume fewer high calorie drinks. My change idea is that I'm going to drink fewer Cokes a week. Maybe right now I drink 7 Cokes a week, and I'm going to cut that back to 2 Cokes a week. You can also see that this change idea hits on 2 of my secondary drivers because I'm also consuming less sugar. That could be pretty common that you have one change idea that hits on several secondary drivers and maybe even several primary drivers. Another change idea falling under consuming less sugar could be to bring carrots for an afternoon snack instead of eating candy. Again, these change ideas are really specific actions or strategies. I could also focus on my other primary driver to expend more calories. How might I do that? I could exercise more frequently. And one specific strategy for doing that would be to ride my bike every day. So this is just a really simple example that I hope illustrates how you can use a driver diagram. And coming back to this slide, I want to demonstrate how I can articulate my theory as a statement too, using the weight loss example that I just showed you. If we want to lose 5 pounds by August, then we need to focus on taking in fewer calories through consuming fewer high-calorie drinks. And one way to do that is to drink fewer Cokes each week. And here's an example of our driver diagram that we're currently using in our UCLA Partner School Network that consists of secondary math teachers who collaborate with each other to grow in their instructional practice. And this document guides our work and is really a dynamic document that we revisit and update every year. So taking a look at this driver diagram, you'll notice our aim on the left-hand side that is very explicitly focused on equity. Teachers implement equitable practices to actively engage students to meet their learning needs. And if you look under the primary drivers over here, you'll notice that we've mostly bounded our system to the classroom because that is what is in the teacher's locus of control. But it does include that crucial driver at the bottom related to administrator support. And the secondary drivers unpack the primary drivers and help us understand the actions that we need to do to push upon the driver diagram, those broad kind of categories of actions. So for example, our first primary driver is teachers engage students in problem solving that promotes conceptual understanding. Well, how do we do that? Well, you'll see in the corresponding secondary drivers, and I won't read them all, but just to give you a couple of examples, we will pose engaging activities that promote problem solving and learning. And we'll use students' mathematical understanding, experiences, culture, and language as resources to support the learning of mathematics. And I should also say that this driver diagram is grounded in research. We use principles to actions from NCTM to initially develop this driver diagram. Here is our reflection moment, and I encourage you to hit the pause button and write down a reflection to these questions. Why is it beneficial to have a theory of improvement to guide your continuous improvement activities? And what might happen if you don't have one? So please take a moment. Thank you for taking that moment to reflect. Lastly, I want to quickly touch upon how you develop a driver diagram. So first, let's talk about what informs your drivers. So hopefully by this stage, you and your team have taken the time to really understand your problem by engaging in that systems analysis and that root cause analysis. And maybe your primary drivers will come from your fishbone diagram or those underlying structures that you identified in your systems thinking iceberg. And these are the areas, right, that you've identified as contributing to your problem. And thus, by focusing on these areas, you might improve upon the problem as well. It's also really important to include content experts and research as you develop the driver diagram. Are there any reports or practices that are grounded in research that could help improve your problem? And I also want to encourage you to embrace your own experiences and knowledge. Really acknowledge the assets that you and your team possess. My only caution is to be reflective of your own mental models and ways of thinking. So remember, our mental models often lead to why our systems may be stuck in the status quo or hard to change. So reflection is an important piece of this too. What are the specific steps that you and your team could take? Well, first, consider the boundary of the system that you'll include in your driver diagram. Driver diagrams can be developed at different levels or grain sizes. So first, really consider what your boundaries are. What is within your sphere of influence? Then in step one, begin with a measurable aim. And even though your aim should be measurable, like a SMART goal, for example, it's also really important not to let the lack of a measure stop you from moving forward. You could begin with a more global aim and then develop the measure later. In step two, develop the primary drivers. What are those big bucket or high leverage drivers of change that need to occur to achieve your aim? Then for step three, unpack the primary driver into more actionable secondary drivers. And remember that your change ideas or specific strategies or practices must align or map back into your driver diagram. And lastly, please know that your first driver diagram or even your second driver diagram or maybe your third one won't be perfect. Like everything else in improvement science, it takes practice, and we learn best by just getting in there and doing it. One more thing. When you're developing your driver diagram, I encourage you to consider these questions taken directly from Hinnett Crawford, who reminds us to always keep equity in mind. As you're developing your driver diagram, ask yourself and your team, will addressing our aim lead to more equitable outcomes? Whose knowledge is reflected in our theory of improvement or driver diagram? Whose is absent? Remember the importance of those multiple perspectives for understanding systems. And importantly, please consider whether your drivers are focused on trying to change students or focused on your own organizational practices and making changes to underlying structures like processes, policies, and so on. I hope this mini lecture on driver diagrams today was helpful. Thank you for joining us.